Ladies, gentlemen and all variations thereupon, it is a snowy March morning, which means, in Britain, that Mother's Day is soon to be upon us. Now, my mum doesn't like me to buy things for her, which means I've got to make something, and I've got to come up with something to make. I think I have something in that my mum has a very bad back at the moment, or rather a shoulder blade, and she's been putting one of these microwavable heat pads on it, but these don't really sit on your body very well, especially when it's on your back. So she's been heating it, putting it on the back and then leaning against the chair. So what I thought I would do instead is make a sort of bag that's going to hold something like this in place. This one is slightly larger than the one she uses, but if it'll fit this, then it'll fit the one that she uses. And what I'm going to do is construct it out of several different types of material to try and maximise the benefit that you're going to get from something like that. First thing that I'm going to do is place this wool as a lining material, because wool is very insulating, and this is scrap wool, so I'm not even spending money on that, so you can be happy about that, Mum. She doesn't like me spending any money. So let's just roughly cut this into a squarish shape, and now that the rough shape is cut, we're going to cut it closer to the actual size, measuring out just roughly by eye. This is a lining material, it's not going to be seen. So now we can set this aside and start work on the actual bag itself. This you may remember from several of my other builds when I'm creating my own bag and such like, and this material is actually linen. And linen is quite a good sort of thermal regulator. It conducts heat very well, but it also insulates quite well as well. And this is going to be the outside because it's got a nice print on it, and it'll be something nice to look at. It'll also allow the heat from the pad to get onto the back at a fairly constant rate. So with this insulating the outside, this allowing the heat to travel through, it should effectively make the heat pad stay warmer for longer, or feel like it's staying warmer for longer, because the heat is going to be directed only in one angle, mostly towards the body at least. And what I want for this is for it to be twice what the heat pad actually is, so it's got to be folded around it. The reason being that I want it to cover all of the outside, so that you always see this nicer print on the outside of it. And if possible, although this has had several chunks taken out of it, so it might not be, I'm going to try and line it up with the pattern on the front, so that it has some interesting look on the outside. So after a bit of messing around with it, I think that is sort of the right angle for it, right placement for it, and if I fold that over, it does completely cover it, and we want it to be completely covered like that because we're going to make a bag around it, and this is going to be visible from the outside, so we want something that's going to be able to enclose something this long. Obviously this has some space in it, so it will squash down, so it doesn't have to be, you know, have excess room, but we want it to be able to comfortably cover it because we're going to have this lining material on the inside as well, so it's going to add a little bit of bulk. So lining that up with the design that I've got, and then folding that across, I can get the two sides together and completely cover that up, which means that this will be large enough for that bag that's going to sit across the back and house the heat pad and the lining material. So let's cut that section out so that I can turn it into a bag. Right, so that's basically the main bag section done now. The next and possibly more complicated part is the strapping. Because if it's going to hold onto the shoulder, then I need a couple of straps at least in order to hold it properly in that position. It's a shoulder blade that hurts mostly, so ideally what we'd need is something to sit on the top of the shoulder and come under this arm, but then also, in order to gain extra stability, to have something that comes around that side as well. So the easiest way I can think to do that and have it remain stable is to have a bifurcated strap. So I have one strap that comes up over the chest, and then have that separate out to go over the side of the arm. So you put it on by putting one arm in and then putting the other side over. In order to do that though, I do have to measure. I haven't been measuring so far. I've just been, you know, placing it up against the bag and then cutting around that. But now I actually do need to measure things. So I'm going to measure how far out this is on me, and then I'm going to put a little bit of elastication into it so that it can stretch out and make it easier to get on and hold in place. But we'll come to that in a moment. So if I were to measure out from my shoulder blade up around my shoulder and to the other shoulder blade, which is roughly where the bag is going to be held, that is 81 centimetres, and then going across the chest and to that shoulder blade, that's 70. So I need to make it 81 in order to make the full length, and then I can shorten one side. Obviously I probably won't need that full length because the bag that I've made is pretty large. I mean, it's going to be this sort of size, and sitting around the back like that, it does cover my entire back. So I only really need to make the strap to the shoulder or just under the arm. But by cutting it to that 80 centimetre mark, I'm giving myself as much wriggle room as I can, so that if I make mistakes, I can, you know, cut a little bit of the fabric off and try again. Right, and that's sort of the sash that we've got, and as you'll notice I've made this quite thick. The reason being is that I do need to fold it over so that it becomes an actual like tube that's going to come round. I don't know exactly how I'm going to sew these together yet. I don't really want to turn the whole thing inside out, so I'll probably just sew it by hand and do an invisible stitch, but I'll tackle that when we get to it. The way this is going to sit is going to be across there and then obviously split. So I need to mark on somewhere around there where the split's going to be. Probably should have done this on the other side so that, you know, I don't have to worry about washing the chalk off, but I've done it now. So that's going to be about where the split's going to be, and I'm going to try and make that about halfway across once I actually get a chance to measure. And then cutting directly down the centre should give me two parts that I can just separate out and join either side of the arm with enough space to put an arm through the hole. The issue with doing this bifurcation though is that where the split is going to be a weak point, so the fabric's likely to tear and keep tearing down. In order to prevent that, I'm going to have to cut another piece of fabric. I'm going to do this as a couple of triangles. You could possibly get away with a diamond, but I'm going to do it as a couple of triangles, and the purpose of this little triangular fabric is just to give that little bit of extra strength so that when you put your arm through and the tension takes up on the fabric, it doesn't take it up right on that split where it actually occurs. The triangular fabric that's been sewn on will take the strain rather than the actual strap itself, so it will be less likely to tear down. And that's basically all the parts are cut out. There is one more thing I need to consider though when I'm pinning this together. Firstly is that the actual bag part that's going to hold the microwave heated cushion thing, that bit has to be pinned together inside out. The reason being that I need to be able to turn it in order to make sure all the seams and everything are on the inside and you don't really see them. The bifurcated strap, however, is a bit more complicated. I could do a turn on it if I cut the bifurcation off, so we've got one extra strap, and then do it as a separate thing, but when you're turning something this long, it's always awkward, so I'm going to try and get away with that if I can, which means I don't want to pin this inside out. I want it the right way round, and I'm going to have to deal with how I'm going to exactly hide the seam. I can either top stitch it, just running the machine straight down, or I can do an invisible seam. That's one possibility. It does actually take a while to do though, as all hand sewing tends to, other than a running stitch, which can go quite quickly. I'm not certain exactly what I'm going to do yet, but I know I'm going to have to attach it with this side facing outwards and with the raw edges folded in, so you know, I'm going to pin it that way. The other thing we need to consider is this elastic. I'm going to put a bit of elastic on it just to make it easier to put on and take off again. But we need to be careful about where we put the elastic. If I put the elastic at the top shoulder, then what will happen is gravity will pull down on the bag and it will just stretch out the elastic and make it loose and not sit against the shoulder. If I place the elastic at the bottom end, so the lowest part of the bag, then the force of gravity is pulling down on the fabric strap, and the fabric strap doesn't really stretch very much. So it will just sit on the shoulder just like a handbag would. The elastic, however, being down there and not fighting against gravity, will pull the two sides together and hold this against the back more firmly. Not overly firm, obviously, but more firmly. Exactly how much elastic I need, though, is going to be a bit of trial and error. So what I'm going to do is pin everything up, pin the two bifurcated sides, the sides that are going to go over the arm, on one side of the bag, and then work out how much elastic I need by pinning, taking the pins out, putting it back in and just wiggling around until I get something that works. So there's no actual measurement involved, it's just a bit of trial and error. This is always a difficult part, trying something on for size while it's got pins in, because you don't want to stab yourself, but it's always a possibility. So I've pinned this together so it's just about where it will be once it's sewn, taking into account the fact that if it wasn't turned the right way around, you'd have that little bit extra because of seam allowance. So taking seam allowance out of it by turning it the right way around, and just small little details like that, tucking the end into the seam rather than just pinning it to the outside to make sure it's exactly the right length, and taking out the twist in the fabric. So there's the strap, and if I turn around and turn it around, you'll see how it's supposed to attach. The heat bag will sit in the bag, and as you can see, it's right over the shoulder blade. If I were to pin it there, cut that bit off and pin it there, then I could get that it would be a reasonable size. Obviously my mum is a different size to me, so it's not exact, but it would be a reasonable sort of size for what I need. However, if I were to do that, then we won't have very much stretch in it. It'd be hard to get on and take off. I have this elastic, which, as I said before, I'm going to use down the bottom here. So I'm going to need to cut something off the bottom of this, and whatever I cut off, I'm going to cut off what I need and then a bit more, and whatever that bit more is how much of the elastic I'm going to put on. I'm also going to cut several strips of this, and I think I'm probably going to go for about 3 centimeters of elastic, several strips of that, because the more of the elastic I put on, the stronger it's going to be in the long term, less prone it's going to be to snapping and breaking. This is about 3 times the width of the elastic, so I'm going to take 3 centimeter strips of elastic, then it's just a case of repinning it so that this sits in where I need it to sit, and then sewing it up. And there we go, that's it all sewn up. So ideally you would heat this, stick it in there, and then continually falling out, isn't it? So, right, so I thought that would be done in that I just heat it up, put it in there, and then put this on. The issue is when you put it on, this tends to fall out, so I'm going to have to put some sort of catch on the top. I was thinking of putting a zip on there. The only thing is, if I put a zip on there, the metal can get hot against there, and I don't want anything to be too hot and burn. So I may have to just put some hook and eyes or something along the top just to keep it sealed, or a button maybe. Okay, so I couldn't find the magnetic clasp, so we're having to do manual press studs. So these can just simply be unsnapped and snapped back on again. And this then is a pretty secure holding. So with it like this, just put it on over your head, over here, and it stays secure across the back. So there we have it, that's my mum's Mother's Day gifts. Hopefully that will hold it more securely against her back. If anything, I think it probably needs to be a bit smaller, but I don't want to make it too small, because then if it doesn't fit, you know, I can always take stuff away easier than I can add in any length onto the strap. So there we have it. And if you've enjoyed that, you can click up here to subscribe. And if you click this video, that's one the algorithm has picked out just for you. And I'll see you the same time next week.